As that countdown was playing, I thought about not the cruel irony, but the rather dark irony that I'm utilizing a countdown clock with Bomb Squad guys on the panel, and I think they know a
We're
thing or
used to
two about
that.
exactly. They know a thing or two about countdowns. Welcome,
You should
everyone.
get like Boris Bednoff and Natasha with the time bomb.
I should have. I might get copyrighted for that though. YouTube is weird that way, So that's
true.
but that's an idea for if YouTube ever loosens the laws.
Pink Panther, something like that.
You're welcome, everybody, to episode 139 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is going to be an interesting one. It is the first edition in 2022 of the miniseries Tales from the Boom Room, Profiles of the NYPD's Arson, Explosion, and Bomb Squad. The miniseries has started almost a year ago with the help of my friend Bill Ryan, who my next guest I know quite well from Arson and Explosion. We've had a lot of really good guys from A&E and the Bomb Squad on the show, and my next three guests are returning individuals for this case that turns 25 years old this week. What am I referring to? Well, January 13th, 1997, a blistering cold Monday in New York City. With the second week of the new year underway, all was normal in the big city until it wasn't. As the day commenced, the United Nations, a city in and of itself, a startling discovery in the form of letter bombs, 4 to be exact, was made, all addressed to Arabic language newspaper Al Hayat, and what the New York Times described as a, quote, widening campaign of terror against an Arabic language newspaper owned by a Saudi prince, end quote. Sent into the fray to save the day, of course, the NYPD's Bomb Squad. And today we're happy to be joined by 3 returning guests. Joining me to dissect this incident 25 years later, some of the men who were there, retired NYPD Bomb Squad detectives Rich Teemsma, Paul Yurkiw, and Don Sadowy join me now for this special issue of Tales from the Boom Room, Profiles of the NYPD's Arson, Explosion, and Bomb Squad. Gentlemen, welcome back. I annoyed you enough to be here a second time. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. It's a good pleasure to be with my cohorts here, and hope we have a good show.
I think we will. Good to have you guys. So I want to start by letting the audience know this wasn't just one collective incident. It was numerous devices found throughout the day. So different teams handled them. We don't have the whole roster of people here, but we certainly have some critical knowledge in the form of these 3 gentlemen. So January 13th of 97, I believe all 3 of you were working the day tour when detectives Mike Murray and Rick Vergara get the first call for the first device. They handle it well, thank God, and they come back. And Paul, I'll let you start us off. What happened next?
Well, Richie and I were doing a double, so we started at 1400, if I'm not mistaken. We got into the office, and then we found out about the device that was handled by Rick Vergara and I believe Mike Murray. And we started our tour at that time in the afternoon. And when they came back to the office, we said something to the effect that, I'm glad you guys handled the device because the chances of New York City having a second device on this tour is slim to none. And although I was known to be wrong on that.
Rich?
Yeah, I remember we started the second tour, which is, the third tour, and we were going to work the first and the third tour that day, and then the first tour the next day, which was from about 3:30 in the afternoon to about 8 the next morning. So when we arrived, we heard about the day tour going out and handling a job at the UN, which was a letter bomb. And so we were just wondering if there was any more coming, or maybe we just lucked out and there won't be any more. Well, we weren't that lucky. So a little while later, we get a call to go to the UN that they had found a second device at the UN. Paul was the lead that day. He was catching. They call catching. If you're catching, it's your case. You're going to run the case. And me, I was just his servant for that day. I was just his backup, his advisor, and some things or whatever.
Conciliary.
I was a yeoman, So anyway, we got there. They had a letter bomb, and I believe it was up in the mailroom, and we wanted to take it down into the underneath the building. There's a roadway under there, and it's all for deliveries, truck deliveries, and all that other stuff, So we set up shop down there, and we were going to take care of it down in the basement, and we had a better control of the area because there was only a door in, a door out. It was just a long driveway. And so we had people at one end, people on the other, and they kept everybody at bay. So it just left us alone in there, and we set up all our equipment. We used sandbags, and also with this job, I remember we had a screen, and it was a grate, actually, So like little 1-inch squares, and it was made of plastic, and it sort of put a shadow over the the device itself. So when we X-rayed it. So when we X-rayed it, we put the shadow. And all we did was we count over this amount of squares and then count it up or down or whatever. And we located the battery and we marked it. And that's when Paul set it up and he used the water disruptor and shot out the battery out of that thing. One thing we did was all of us, we got pretty lucky with this thing. We had a lot of evidence left over. These were letter bombs out of the place called Alexandria, Egypt, against a newspaper called Al Hayat. And they sent out, I think, about 24 devices. I know ours, I remember seeing number 19 and number 21 on the envelopes. They had numbered these things. So anyway, there was a battery in there. The battery was from an old Polaroid camera that if you were every time you put in a cartridge with new film pictures, they had a new battery in there for that. So they took that apart and they used that battery in a device because it was a nice flat battery. So it worked well with the card. It was a good little greeting card inside, like the type you open up and it plays music for you. And anyway, there's a little switch in there, and it's just a slide switch, and it's goes like this. Maybe you can see this is the connections, and there's a little piece of plastic that slides between that inside those cards. And when you open up the card, there's a strap onto the other side of the card, and it pulls this back, and it makes a connection. What they did was they took that disconnected from the card and they put it to the envelope. So when you pull out the card, that's when the switch closed on you, and that's when it blew up. Semtex was the explosive used. It's the Eastern Bloc C4. It's very similar to our C4, so I call it C4, but it's really not. It's Semtex. It's made differently. It's made with RDX and PETN. Ours is, and it's about 80% explosive, and the rest of it's all filler with plastic and all that stuff. So you can mold it pretty good. And then we just made it nice and flat. Some more about that explosive is it's a little bit more unstable than C4. C4 has it doesn't have any of the it just has RDX in it. It doesn't have the PETN. And so if you're on the battlefield with that stuff, it's a military grade explosive, very high explosive called HE. And if you're on the battlefield, I'd rather be carrying C4 this way. If you take a bullet through the C4, it's not going to set it off. But if you take a bullet through Semtex, it's very well, it just might because it's a little more sensitive, a little more unstable that way. So it might just blow you up in a couple of pieces, So you don't want to really carry that on the battlefield. What else can I tell you about this? It was invented in 1898 by the Germans. They didn't really use it until World War II. After World War II, they started to develop it. 1964, they had it up to it's called a Semtex 1A. 1967, it was a Semtex H. And in 1987, it was a Semtex 10. It was just two different variations of it. It was still the same explosive. Sort of like an orange, red orange, brick orange in color. Sometimes it looks more pink than orange, but that's what Semtex is. What else can I say about that? They used a blasting cap in this thing. And what was strange about these blasting caps was they used a pair of pliers because you can see the markings on it, and they flattened them out, so they would fit in the envelope nice. Would have this little round bump in there. So less giveaway. I wouldn't want to do that to a blasting cap, but they did, and they got very lucky with it, I guess. I didn't see any blood on the inside of the envelopes, So,
how pissed off you got to be to do that at somebody.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I mean, I'm very dangerous. I'd use a vice probably, and sort of try to direct it away from me. Maybe use something where it's long, away from it, and tighten and flatten it with that. But it looked like plier marks to us. You can see them in there. So
teeth in the blasting cap.
Yeah.
Teeth from maybe vice grips. That definitely didn't use a hammer.
No, if you used a hammer, probably would have set that off. Inside that also is RDX, by the way, inside a blasting cap. So it's still a high explosive in there. So, but it takes a good shock to do it. With this thing here, Paul and I, we worked for Homeland Security after the police department, and we gave lessons on all this stuff. I always made it simple. I made it where I had the KISS theory: keep it simple, stupid. I tell myself that all the time. But we taught cops. They weren't bomb techs. We just wanted to train them on what to look for and just to get away from it. They used to always say, if you can see the bomb can see you, and it's definitely going to bite you if it sees you. Set it off, and showed them all different ways of setting this thing off. But I used to make it very simple. You only have two types of explosives out there. You have a low order and you have a high order. A low order is below 3,300 feet per second coming at you, the speed of the blast. If you shoot a gun, 9mm, it's about 1,500 feet per second, or around here. I forget the exact thing. But anything above, I have that written down too. Anything above 3,300 feet per second, it can climb all the way up to close to 30,000 feet per second. That's a detonation. That's not a burn. If you set off a low explosive, it's called a burn. If you set off a high explosive, it's called a detonation. Detonations don't blow your fingers apart. They just evaporate your hands, take off your head, and all that other stuff. So these
Sounds
envelopes,
lovely.
yeah, but they were very, very, very dangerous because
like a
that's
pink
exactly what they would do.
Turn you into a pink mix. Sitting by patiently, and his mind is churning because I know him well enough by now, is one Don Sadowy, and I'll get to him momentarily. In January, I do want to read this. In January 1997, at least 14 letter bombs were mailed to the newspaper's headquarters in London. Of course, New York, as we're discussing tonight, Washington, and Riyadh, which for those of you that don't know is in Saudi Arabia. 2 security guards were wounded by one of the bombs as it exploded in the London headquarters. Don Sadowy was the intelligence coordinator for the bomb squad at the time, a liaison pretty much in the world, as he discusses in his book Rendered Safe: Tales of an NYPD Bomb Tech. Plugging it there if you want to buy it. So Don, London's about 4 or 5 hours ahead of us here in the U.S. I'm pretty sure you heard about this heading into the office that morning. Take me through it from your perspective.
I don't remember all of my movements that day, but one of the things that I think that I must have asked the boss permission. I think my partner back then was Richie Hockford, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm pretty sure I asked whoever the boss was working if I can go over to the UN. The UN had a big office for Al Hayat. There also was an office in Long Island City. And my memory's a little shaky here, so you guys might have a little better memory than me. I think Jerry Hogue went with a team over to the printing office of Al Hayat. It's in an industrial area of Long Island City. It's like a 2-story brick building, and that's where they actually print out the copies of the newspaper here in New York. They went there and spoke with the people there, and I believe I went to the UN at a certain point. While I was there, for those who don't know, I actually worked at the UN and UN security for 3.5 years before I came on the job. So when I went there, I still had a lot of friends who remembered me, and I went there to talk to them, and I talked to the people from Al Hayat, and basically my memory is a little sketchy, but basically the reason that they were targeted, they print articles from everybody basically in the Middle East, and you could be pro one side, pro the other side, and they'll print the articles. Apparently, there was an article written about a particular group, and here's where it gets dicey. They took offense at it, so that was the reason that these letter bombs were sent out to Al Hayat in London, New York, and a couple other places in the United States. And I tried to get as much information as I could. And behind the scenes, I tried to keep the UN security bosses and their people off the backs of the responding teams from the bomb squad. and just let them do what they're trained to do. In the interim, while I was there, I can't mention the guy's name, but I had a couple of guys come over to me privately from UN security, and they were Americans. And they told me privately they had 5 machines, really good X-ray machines, and their people were not properly trained. Search for a bomb. Well, what does a bomb look like? You know? So
Right.
to take it a step further, out of the 5 machines, 2 of them don't work. And they're in other buildings within the UN and across the street at the UNDC building, as it's called, which is right across the street from UN headquarters. So they're doing smoke and mirrors, and their bosses didn't do anything to alleviate this. Now the poop hits the fan, so to speak. There's 3 machines working, and the people who use them weren't properly trained, and there's 2 machines at 2 other spots. I come to find out that there's, on an average day, Monday through Friday, from around the world, there are 55,000 pieces of mail that come to UN headquarters every day, Monday through Friday. And at this point, it was decided to shut the building down, send all the staff home, have the maintenance staff get they're dollies with canvas with metal that holds it up, and when they go into each office area, after work, they dump the the paper trash into these bins. It was decided to go to everybody's desk, everybody's in basket, and take all the mail that's in the building and bring it downstairs, and it has to be all screened by the bomb squad, not UN security. So I was the buffer for that. And from there, you guys pick it up from there.
Well, before we get back into that, I will shout out briefly to our friends watching tonight. That's Alicia B., of course, Lieutenant Peter Pranzo, street crime legend, author of Harlem Raiders. Angela Ang, retired NYPD officer. She worked in the 13th Precinct. And, of course, my sister is here tonight. And my sister, who is not really a scientific person, is probably looking at this tonight like, what? But they did a good job of explaining it. So, Judge, if you're watching, hopefully you have a clear understanding. Now, I'm going to throw it back to Paul and Rich in a second, but to your point, and I don't mean to be joking around about this, but it's kind of morbid humorous. You and I joked off the air, Don, because think about it. I'm picturing the conversation amongst these individuals before they sent out these devices. And I'm going to read a couple of lines from the New York Times article in a moment. So about this article, gentlemen, what should we do? Rajesh, how about a civilized debate to settle this argument? Muhammad, bombs. Let's send out bombs. I've never heard that used as a solution before in an argument, but apparently around this time it was. So from the New York Times.
Well, excuse me, Mike, you recall the conversation we had last night.
Yes.
About, how absurd this sounds in modern world. It's not that absurd when we look back a couple of years ago about what happened to that cartoon in a magazine in a publisher's office in Paris, France. And terrorists actually came in and gunned down and killed everybody who was there.
Yeah. Now, of course, we make I'm not making fun of these incidents, but of course, the irony of the stupidity in sending out these devices as a means to try to send a message. It's a powerful message, but unfortunately, it does more harm than good, as you and I were ultimately getting at in that conversation. I do remember that. Because this is serious stuff. I mean, you think we take it here seriously here in America, and certain other parts around the world, the response is a little bit different. And sometimes that different can mean extreme, as these men know from that job in 1997. The New York Times does say in an article written by Sarah Lyle, dated January 14th, the day after this incident, investigators said they had no suspect or motives for the bombing, the latest in a series of similar attacks in recent weeks against Al Hayat. Diplomats have said the paper, which has a circulation of about 200,000, is principally owned by Prince Khalid ibn Sultan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm trying my best. If I didn't, I apologize. Former deputy commander of Saudi Arabian forces who gained fame during the Gulf War, who is the son of the country's defense minister, Prince Sultan ibn Abdelaziz, and a nephew of King Fahd. Employees at Al Hayat said today they did not know why the newspaper had been singled out. We don't know why we were being targeted, said Regina Durgam, the paper's United Nations correspondent. We are an independent newspaper. We report the news independently. We have editorial comment that has criticized almost everyone within the Middle East, which probably explains, as you said, Don, just now, why this ended up happening. So the second team that handled this is the late Detective Charles Hill, who's not with us anymore, sadly, and Jeff Oberdier, who handled these jobs twice with another detective who I'll mention later. So they get through this particular job, same makeup. Now there's a pattern here, because if there's one, okay, now there's two. And if there's two, there's probably going to be a third one. Now, in the bomb squad, I don't want to use the word worry, but Paul, I'll start with you first. You guys are obviously on your toes for this. Did you pretty much expect at this point that we were going to get a third device after the second one?
Not a third device, no. Once we got the phone call to respond to the UN on the second device, pretty sure that this was going to be something close to what the first one was. And as Richie had previously mentioned, that they were numbered. You know, when you start seeing like the number 19 or the number 20, you know, I'm sure the guy didn't count by twos or threes, and there's probably at least 20 or more that are going to be out there, whether they're going to be at the UN or maybe they're going to be Gracie Mansion or 1PP, you know, or downtown Wall Street. So once the third job came in, I think all of us thought about that. We might be doing this into the rest of the next day and then call for backup to help relieve and just to continue to render safe these devices that might start popping up all over New York City.
Regina Durgam, I'm going to get to you, Rich, in a second. Regina Durgam deserves a lot of credit because she inadvertently probably saved some lives, because I mentioned the time difference between London and the United States. She came in, according to an article I read, to a security guard at the UN and said, "Did you hear about what just happened in London where the bomb had gone off over there and injured 2 guards?" And that raised his suspicions. They screened mail a bit more cautiously that day, which led to the discovery and you guys being able to get down there and help out before it turned into a disaster. So she definitely deserves a lot of credit for that. And she was a target too, unfortunately. So intelligence is coming in rapidly here. And I do have some photos that Don showed me. And Rich, I'm going to let you walk us through the first one here. What do you see? What can you tell us?
I see a mess. I say I can see in here. Well, can you see my arrow?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, that's
Sorry,
gone.
let me put it back on.
Okay, so it's hard to tell from this angle here,
Mhm.
but this looks like the Semtex in here.
Mhm.
But you know, I tell you, it's on top of tinfoil, so it's kind of tough to say. This is definitely a circuit breaker for what that's in the card,
Mhm.
and the switch comes out, and it probably goes into here. That's the blasting cap type of the wire. Over here, this is probably the switch, the pull switch, and I don't know. It's kind of tough just with one picture, you know.
Mhm.
I don't see. This might be over here the battery, because it was like a plastic, not plastic, but it was a aluminum wrap battery. But then I see all aluminum down here, so very tough with this picture. This wasn't on device, by the way.
Okay, well, I'll display another
That I
one.
can say it.
We'll display another one here. See if this provides a clearer
Okay,
angle.
this is the battery I'm talking about. This is
Right.
in the pack when you put it into a Polaroid camera. When you put in a fresh a cartridge of pictures, that's inside that thing. This here is your little. It's just a little the mechanism that plays the music or sends the electric to the music, except it's not going there. I don't see any explosives in here.
Let's see. Let me find another photo here. One
this,
moment.
This might be
We
the
have X-rays here.
Semtex. Yeah,
That was the
okay,
X-ray.
X-ray. All right, that's right. I forgot about this. They had pins in there,
Mhm.
you know, for more shrapnel. This here is definitely a blasting cap.
Mhm.
You can see it in here, and this is the C4 itself, and this is your battery.
Mhm.
So, and this is your little pull switch. When you take out the envelope, it sends juice into the battery, and the battery is going to set the blasting cap off, and then the blasting cap here will set off the Semtex. That's a much better shot. There's
Okay.
nothing really destroyed, but they did have pins in these things. I forgot all about that.
Paul, what can you add?
No, I concur. Same thing. The battery pack and the switching mechanism, like a gift card. And I remember the pins, and the blasting cap was bent like a squashed like elliptical. Wasn't round, wasn't cylindrical. It was more of an elliptic, kind of like an egg shape, kind of. And to do something like that, it's pretty nervy to put any pressure on a blasting cap. They're so sensitive to even static electricity. So.
Paul Yurkiw, Rich Teemsma, and Don Sadowy, retired NYPD Bomb Squad detectives, are our guest here on Tales from the Boom Room, Profiles of the NYPD's Arson, Explosion, and Bomb Squad. This is volume 18, hard to believe, of the miniseries, volume 18. We're covering the 1997 UN letter bombs incident. It's been 25 years yesterday and today since that incident happened. I'm certainly glad these gentlemen have rejoined me on the show. Now, I always like to focus on the context of the time in which this incident happened, because we're not too far removed, obviously, from 93. There had been the crash of TWA Flight 800, which wasn't terrorism, but people kind of felt that at the time before they knew, given the fact that 93 had happened a little bit prior. The Atlanta Olympics bombing had happened. The bombing in Oklahoma City with Tim McVeigh had happened. So you guys often work, especially you being the intelligence coordinator at the time, Don, you guys often work connecting the dots to see if there are any dots to connect. Was there anything, without giving any secrets away, of course, for you, Don, that was raising your eyebrow prior to this incident in regards to terrorism around the world and the potential for incidents in New York?
Nothing directly. I was very fortunate. I had liaison, of course, with the UN from working there prior. I also had an excellent relationship with the Israelis. I had an excellent relationship with the Brits and the Canadians, and with the State Department. By this time, I had my clearances, and I'm not going to say the name of our contact, but the guy from the State Department in the New York field office was just outstanding. I would come down every 2 weeks and was allowed to be briefed on anything that might even relate to the bomb squad. And what I had to do as kind of rules of the game, you can't use the names of anybody named in a report, from overseas. But I could use the name of a group. I couldn't say who the bomb maker was, but that they were active doing stuff in Europe or doing stuff in the Middle East. And I would put a report together and bring it back to the bomb squad and put it up on a clipboard in the back room and just try to make sure all the teams, when I had a chance, take a look at it. This is the latest intelligence I was able to bring back. And that's pretty much how I operated.
So at this time, the second device is subsequently rendered safe by the late Detective Hill and Detective Oberdeer, who was ironically a newbie in the bomb squad. He had just come to the bomb squad in 1995, and he had just gotten her certification in 96. So this was kind of his welcome to the bomb squad moment, if you will. Shout out to Jeff tonight. He couldn't be with us, but a great guy. And I hope he's watching and enjoying the show. So that brings us to the third device, which you, Paul, and you, Rich, were down there for. And down there as well in a separate team was Charlie Hill, once again, with Detective Kevin Berry, one of the senior members of the squad. So now we're in a pattern here. We don't know who this is coming from, but we do know that there is obviously a serious incident underway. This is a coordinated effort to try to cause destruction in the United Nations. You have some background now from what Charlie and Jeff just did and what Mike Murray and Rick Figueroa had done. Same makeup, but nonetheless, sometimes there could be surprises. What if it's made of something else? What if it's not the same level of explosive? So again, without giving anything away, between you two, and I'll start with you, Paul, what was the conversation like on the way back down to the UN?
On the way back to the
on the way back down, once again, to handle this third device.
That 3 is not going to do it. It's going to probably be a lot more, even though the fourth one was also rendered safe properly. And, that we had no more calls at the end of after the fourth device. it was kind of surprising. But I think soon thereafter, we got phone calls on, they had these birthday cards that play music. So we even got calls soon thereafter, weeks after, to come and take x-rays of gift cards that played music and things like that. But on the way back, as far as going to the third device, best that we could do is offer support and backup to Kevin and Charlie.
We have other landmarks in New York, obviously. This is before 9/11, so we had the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center most prominently. We have the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the Statue of Liberty, all of whom could be targets potentially as well. We don't know that at the time. Thankfully, they were not that day. But if this is a campaign to attack one landmark, which is international territory, what's to stop them from attacking other landmarks throughout the city as well? Rich, was that a concern on your mind upon the discovery of more devices, especially this third one?
Well, in '93 we had the bombing of the World Trade Center, and this was '97, so this is 4 years after that. So ever since the bombing of the World Trade Center, we always had that on our mind that they could be taken. In fact, I knew we were going to go back to the Trade Center again. I knew that. I felt it in my heart. And I always carried around a mask with me. I got a mask on that bombing. They gave me a mask, so gave us all masks to go down. And I kept my mask, and I said, "I'll be back, so I'm going to put this on." And that's exactly what I did. As soon as I got down there, I put that mask on my face. I didn't breathe too much of that stuff in, And I'm about the only one down there with the mask on, I think, at the time. So you always think of it. Always try to be ready, prepared for this thing. And the best thing you do is just to be prepared. So listen up and learn, and see what you can get from other techs. We were always in constant communication with any type of bombing throughout the U.S. and sometimes throughout the world. And all you do is pick up the phone and call, and you can speak to the guy that handled it directly, and he could fill you in on everything on this thing. So, and that's what we used to do. If LA had a bomb, we would just call up the LA bomb squad, or Atlanta. In fact, Atlanta. Paul and I, we took a plane down to Washington, and we went over that device and FBI headquarters, the one that they had used in Atlanta, because it was sort of similar to what we had up in New York, but it wasn't. It was nowhere near this thing, But he was a little crazy. That guy had a pipe about as big as a fire hydrant.
It was right.
It was a big pipe, a big clock too. It was a big clock like this. This guy's an overkill, but
yeah.
Anyway, that we studied other bombings because you never know what's going to happen to you. There's a good chance it would happen. Something like that would.
I got to ask, and I apologize if this sounds like a silly question, but that's why I have you guys here. You guys can fill me in. And for those of you that are watching in the chat, if you have a question, as I always like to say, ask away, and I'll make sure they see it at some point. One of them can answer it. Is in big spaces and small spaces, I wonder how that changes the operation, because you guys did go down to the mailroom. I've never, I don't really know the makeup of the UN that well, so you guys can explain it better than I can. But working in a confined space like that, or in a larger space, depending on what it is, does that affect the render safe operations in any way?
Oh,
to me, it does.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, why?
Almost 10 times. If a high explosive device, like Richie was saying, is somewhere in the vicinity of 30,000 feet per second, you could probably multiply that 10 times down in the subway. That's why you think of the subway as one of the targets, because it'll travel through the tube like a cannon, and the blast be significant, incredible. And you have that much. It's like taking a firework, going out to, say, baseball field and setting a firework off. It's no big deal. If you take that same scenario and you go into a closet and you set that off, you're going to remember that.
Yeah.
So subways, any kind of confined spaces, the basement or the mailroom, like the UN, anything that's steel reinforced, where it's going to keep the pressure in, and it's going to go the path of least resistance. So any kind of doorways, tunnels, halls, anything that blast is going to follow it and go to the path of least resistance, and you'll have a horrific explosion compared to if it was out in the field someplace.
Don, I'll get back to you right now. Back to the New York Times article here, which is titled Al Hayat, a Journalistic Noah's Ark, which was written by, excuse me here one moment while I find the writer's name, Youssef Ibrahim, dated January 15th, 1997. And it mentions here in regards to circulation of Al Hayat, it says, quote, by world standards, Al Hayat is a newspaper of modest circulation since, for context, has gone out of print and went out of print right at the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. Continuing with the article, printing in London, Frankfurt, Germany, Bahrain, Cairo, and New York. It has a distribution that does not exceed 200,000 copies a day at most, but it is regarded as by far and away, as we covered earlier, the best and most intensely read Arab newspaper. Now, the Arab community, like any community in a city of 8 million people, is extensive. There's a large Hispanic community, a large German community, you name it, there's a large community of anything. So for the Arab community at the time, even though these devices were coming from Alexandria, Egypt, as was discussed at the beginning, there might be contacts in New York. You never know. There's a lot of plots, as John Miller once noted, that not only target New York City, but emanate from New York City, targeting other locations. Was that a scenario, and at any point in this investigation, that you entertained personally, Don?
I really, thinking back on this, the biggest thing was to keep an open mind. And as a member of the bomb squad, as I was trained years ago, basically you try to follow the physical evidence as much as you can. You keep an open mind. I was taught you take any personal feelings about something and you shelve it, and you just keep an open mind, and you just keep looking, and you keep trying to tap into whatever channels of information that people are willing to share with you. So I was doing a lot of liaison work, and probably at that time I relied on my contacts at the UN, the Israelis, and most of all with the U.S. State Department, because they were the conduit that also helped open some doors for me, speaking to some other agencies. But nobody had anything on this when this happened. And the only thing that I was able to ascertain pretty quickly through the UN, when I went there talking face to face to people, was that, again, this newspaper would entertain articles from everybody, no matter what side you were on, what faction, they would print it. And apparently that was the source of the problem that a particular group took offense to. I can't remember the names of the groups, honestly, from that time, but that was the source, from what I understood very quickly. And nobody had anything. The Israelis didn't have anything. The State Department didn't have anything. Some of the other agencies. It was really the best intelligence was coming from Paul and Richie. They were there. They were hands-on.
So that brings us back, I guess, to this incident in question. At some point, the robot does come into play. But before I get to the robot, which the bomb squad utilizes to help render these devices safe, emergency service supplements the bomb squad at these scenes. And Paul and Rich, like a lot of guys that have gone into the bomb squad, you guys used to be in emergency service before you both came to the squad in '93. And the reason I mention them is because some of the trucks have the total containment vessel. Now, for those of you that do not know what that is, the total containment vessel, or total containment vehicle, however you want to describe it, is one of the vehicles that ESU has that you can put an explosive device in. It's like a cylinder. It's the best way I can describe it. And it's built in a way that it can safely detonate the explosive in there without anybody getting hurt. Truck 2 in Harlem has it. Truck 6 in Brooklyn has it as well. And Truck 8 in Queens? Is that where Truck 8 is? Brooklyn. Thank you. Brooklyn has the total containment vehicle or vessel as well. So they're down there with that. And you guys are calling the shots. What did you need them to do in that moment?
And as far as that, they just set it up for us. They opened it up for us. We were going to put it in. Well, Paulie was going to put it in. Paulie was a lead guy on that. So. But as far as the TCV, it's made of skin of a nuclear submarine, so it can take a lot of pressure. And when it goes off, it has vents, and you hear a little crack. That's all you hear, like a little crack, and it will vent out. The gases will vent out. But they set it up. They opened it up for us. And the Paul would take the package and he'd go put it inside it. There's a little basket in there that rides in. You can put it in the basket, and then Paul would close over the door. And just like in the submarine, you spin that little wheel there, and it locks it all in. So it's a great tool because they had other ones, but it was invented. They called it invented, where the top of it was open, so you put the package down inside. But we have tall buildings in New York, so if the device goes off, all that pressure is going to go up, and it's going to break windows up on the 19th, 20 floors of buildings or whatever. So this here is just a total containment. It doesn't go anywhere. So you could be driving in traffic; it doesn't matter. You know.
And for those of you that may be paying attention or may have paid attention to these headlines when they happened a couple of years ago, you may recall the pipe bomb sent to the New York Times and CNN and Robert De Niro and other famous figures. You may have seen that total containment vehicle being driven in the news clips, hauling those explosives away where they could be safely detonated and not harm anybody. So I go back to the photos that Don sent in, and I haven't showed this one yet. And Paul, I'll start with you and explain what we're seeing here in this photo.
I really can't make it out too well. I don't know if I can make my screen bigger or not. My screen is only like about maybe an inch by 2 inches, so it's really hard.
Okay, so in that case, I'll throw it Don and Rich. Can you see it a little bit better?
Yeah, I can see it pretty good. Well, you got a ruler there. That's a square, but it's a ruler. It just shows you the measurement. Can you see my arrow?
No, but we can still decipher.
All right. So anyway, but that's a blasting cap. What you're looking at, and you can even see where they flatten it down. You can see as they're going down. You can see where they flatten it with the pliers on that. I'm not sure if this from this device or not, but and the two wires, the yellow one, and it looks like a red one. That's the lead wires going into the blasting cap, and it's going to set off. There's a little plunger in here. Past that is there. It's going to be a more sensitive explosive. And then you're going to have maybe your RDX or some type of high explosives at the tip of this thing. So when it's a train, it sets off one to the other, these things. But that's just the blasting cap.
Okay, so that's what it looked like. That's what they were flattening.
Yeah.
And here is another interesting photo. Go ahead, Don.
If we could just go back to that for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
This is a photograph from the lab. I went up and I spoke to the tool examiner in the lab, the crime scene lab in the NYPD, and had a long conversation about these marks. And going back to what Rich had said earlier about the marks on the blasting cap, that there was a discussion in the lab with the lab techs that this wasn't done in a vise, that apparently the markings, when they were examined more closely, was somebody actually held like a set of pliers or dikes and actually held it and squeezed it at different pressures in different areas on a different angle. So that just reinforced everything that Richie had said previously. This is actually from one of those devices, Rich. I went back to the bomb squad recently and got permission to go into the archives, and I got permission to take some pictures to use for our presentation this evening.
Yeah. All right. I can see the plier marks on it.
Yeah.
I got a question here from the chat before we continue. This is from Angela Ang, who, like I said earlier, did 20 years and most of her time in the 13th precinct. She wants to know, how many times can you detonate a device in one of those trucks, I guess the total containment vehicle, before the integrity of it is compromised?
Well, it takes time for that to vent. It might take up to maybe 10 hours to vent. In a truck, we had what we call a LaGuardia bomb truck. It was a steel mesh cables that we used. It was on a tractor trailer. And that just kept the frag in, but the overpressure, of course, would blast out. So it wasn't quite that safe, especially around tall buildings. But as far as I understand, the TCV, it takes almost, depending upon the amount of explosives that's in there, the type, whether it's Semtex, C4, it could take almost maybe 10 hours to vent. So if we had multiple devices that needed to be placed in the TCV before they were disrupted, we have, I just believe, the 2 TCVs, unless we have a third one in 10 truck, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know, Rich.
What, 10 truck?
Yeah, does that have a TCV, or that was just for the robot?
I think they just had a robot. I think the TCV was was a truck, I know for sure, and three truck maybe.
And two truck had it
Two
in
truck, yeah,
Harlem.
two truck. Never
Yeah.
mind, two truck. Right.
Yeah.
As
So
far as using it over and over again, I mean, after, I don't know how many times you can use this before it finally gives way because you do have metal fatigue, So it's a good question, but I can't answer how many times you can use it. But I've seen it used more than once, that's for sure. Great, great tool.
I remember talking to John Lampkin, and I was like, I wonder what those drives must have been like for the e-cops. He must have made an extra coin that week to have to make that drive over to Robin's Neck. And he was like, it really wasn't that bad because of how well it was constructed, especially the more modern ones. It's
not. Had to drive very slow too.
Right. If you imagine you hit a speed bump, one of those things in the back.
But recently out in California, I believe it was California when they had LA, right? They had a massive amount of fireworks. But they must have been really, really strong fireworks, and they overloaded it. They just packed it, and it went off, and it just destroyed it.
Yeah, it wasn't a good sight.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the fourth and final device, which was Jeff Oberdeer again. Jeff was working overtime that day. Poor guy, but he did a great job. Jeff and Kevin Barry. Kevin, I think, was working the night tour, so he's there again. He wasn't the primary the previous time. Now he is with Jeff, and they handle that one. And it's more of the same thing at this point. You know what these devices are comprised of. You know, of course, what you're looking at. You don't know who it's coming from yet, but you generally know the makeup. And that brings me back to one of the photos before I dive deeper into the fourth device here. We have this. Don, as you just mentioned, you were at the archives recently. And then, Paul, if you could see that, I'll go to you in a moment. Right. But you got this from the archives. Describe what we're seeing here, Donnie.
Who are you talking to, Mike?
You.
Oh, sorry. Hearing's the second thing to go, guys. I'm not going to tell you. It's the outer envelope, and it has plenty of intelligence information here. It's got the government stamps from overseas. It's got the address, possible latent prints. I mean, this really was excellent job that the guys from the bomb squad did with their render safe. I would call it surgical shots because they're surgically shooting the water cannon at it. Nobody got hurt, thank God. And these guys definitely were in harm's way, but they handled it very professionally and retrieved all the evidence intact, which of course, once it goes to the lab and then other agencies get involved, it opens up a huge investigation. But I mean, this is like a treasure trove of evidence once the render safe is done.
Paul, well, actually, let me put the photo back up here. Paul, what can you add to that?
Yeah, no, I concur. Same thing with Don. The way the package was shot, we were able to recover good evidence, and whether it be latent prints or possibly there was any type of handwriting on the envelope, and where the postage and the stamps and has the dates on it. I really can't see too well, but those stamps, they have a lot of evidence as far as where the package passed through different terminals of postage, and they get stamped. And then it was finally sent where it says United Nations Building, New York, USA.
I think what's interesting about this is that it's not taking place at any other landmark. For those of you that don't understand, and I'm sure you do, but I'll just put it out there anyway, because you never know. Because I learned these things on the fly as well. The United Nations is not New York territory. It's international territory. It's in New York, but it's not really in New York, if you know what I'm trying to say. So as you explained to me, and our mutual friend Bill Ryan explained to me off the air, you can't just walk in there. Even if you're there on police business and you identify yourself, hey, I'm a cop, they have to let you in. Now, here, obviously, they're not, if they have bombs in the building, they're not going to say, no, you need to go to the desk first and fill out a form. Obviously, they're going to let you right in. But nonetheless, given the makeup of this complex, given its cultural significance, given the rules that surround it not being your conventional New York City building, did it have any effect on operations both during, while these devices were being discovered, and afterwards, of course, screen the mail, or given the magnitude of the situation and obviously the safety that was in peril at that moment, did it not matter?
The security on that building helped us out a great deal because they just shut off the area. We just drove into the building, drove down into the underneath the building, and worked
Mhm.
right there out of the van. And they kept everybody else away, elevators and everything else, just kept it away. They sealed off the basement to it, and we were just allowed to do it to work down there without anybody bothering us at all. So that was to our advantage.
Mhm. This was an investigation that you guys probably knew was going to be taken over by the FBI, given where it happened. And obviously, the FBI, its largest field office, I believe, is in New York City. But nonetheless, they gave you guys a lot of credit, deservedly so. You guys all did a great job in your respective roles. Without giving anything away, of course, I'm not trying to have the NYPD Intelligence Division call me as soon as this podcast is over and say, "So about this, Mike," to which I will then pee my pants. Was there anything regarding that they told you, "Hey, we're looking at this scenario, we're hearing this from overseas"? Was there anything they let you in on, especially you, Don, being the intelligence coordinator?
I could tell you straight up, FBI didn't share poop.
Nothing.
If they had information, if I found out that it was directed to them in some way from another outside source, and I confront them on it, their usual line was, "Yeah, we know about that, but we can't tell you." And it really used to make me very angry. Many times, like the guys here, they're risking their personal safety, and they're being professional. They're working around the clock. They come to the office the next day. They take the evidence after it's marked, bagged, and tagged. They take the case folder, and they leave. And at 11 o'clock that morning, they're in Brook Brothers suits holding a conference with the media, saying they're in charge and arrest is imminent. I was very frustrated dealing with the FBI. The best agency that I dealt with personally as the intelligence coordinator was the field office of the U.S. State Department, Bureau of Diplomatic Security. I cannot mention the guy's name. He's still around, and he's a great supporter of the bomb squad and the NYPD. He and the U.S. Postal Inspectors were great. ATF was great. Secret Service was always great. The most difficult agency to deal with was the FBI. I don't think I'm talking out of term. I don't know if the guys will agree with me on this, but we've had a history with dealing with them, and it was not good. Sorry to say.
It's fine. It's more for historical context that I ask. We're not trying to do the Jerry Springer show here, but it's good to know this stuff, obviously, to give further context. So,
I just
go
want
ahead,
to
Rich.
add one little thing.
Go right ahead.
One thing the FBI, they gave us credit
Mhm.
for having the best evidence after those jobs. We saved the best evidence. We had the most evidence as far as the way it was constructed, and every piece of that envelope and the card and everything that it contained, we handed over to them, and they were very, very pleased with that.
Okay.
'Cause, all right.
Paul, I'll ask you this question. And don't give me the specifics of the conversation. You can just say yes or no. You mentioned earlier, it was either you or Rich that mentioned earlier, obviously conversations with other bomb squads. Maybe you can't call up the bomb squad or EOD in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, but you can definitely call up the Washington, D.C. bomb squad. Were there conversations between NYPD bomb squad and Washington following these incidents?
You'd have to ask Donnie with that. Us as bomb techs working the job, we didn't do too much in the avenue of investigation unless it was brought to our attention. As far as sharing the information, most likely that would have been directed to Donnie, and then he would, in turn, speak to the boss and then get permission to give helping information as far as our devices were concerned and how they were constructed.
Sorry, Paul, I didn't mean to cut you off. So I'm going to get back to you in a second because I want to ask you another question. Don, can you, yes or no, were those conversations had?
No.
Okay.
And just real quick, the reason was the people who had the most information was Paul and Rich. Mm-hmm. They were the guys on the scene.
Right.
I described what they did was very heroic. there was risk of personal safety, but they were very professional and knowledgeable in what they did. And I'll compare them to surgeons. They did surgical shots, and as Richie said, the FBI complimented them about the recovery of the evidence. I mean, this was textbook spot on, the way that they analyzed this and they decided to render it safe. And like I said, there was, in my words, a treasure trove of evidence that, due to the way that they rendered it safe, and due to the way that they came to the conclusion to analyze what to do, I mean, it's a great credit to these men. You know, a lot of times, guys like Paul and Richie, they're like unsung heroes because you read something in the newspaper, but people don't know what actually happened and what personal risks these men took and doing the job that they're trained to do. So my hat is off to both of you, gentlemen.
Well, thanks,
Mine
Don.
too. And when you guys come down to New Haven, I'll buy you a slice of pizza.
Yeah, we were surgeons without surgeons' pay.
That's true. That's true.
You know, when you do stuff in school, in Huntsville, Alabama, you know, and they first they teach you how to build them, and then they teach you how to take them apart or how to render them safe. But when you work with the disruptor and you do it in school, it is what it is. Out of practice makes perfect, and you try to get a good shot. But when it's showtime, and and myself and Richie and every bomb tech that's out there knows that they got a working package, they got a working device. It's an IED, lead a bomb, what have you. And now, what you were trained to do, now you're going to put it in motion. And some of the evidence that was recovered, not only on this device but the one in '97, it worked. You did what you were trained to do. You did the right thing. You took the steps. And I remember the bosses, in '97, I think it was Kamadama. He just said something to the effect that, I just need to know what you guys are going to do. I just need to know ahead of time what your plan is and stuff. And, you know, you guys run with it. You do what you're trained to do. And it worked out.
To Don's point earlier about the FBI, I'll say this. I have the article in front of me from CNN dated January 13th, 1997. And it reads as follows, quote, the FBI has dismissed as, quote unquote, speculative reports as it investigating a possible connection between those bombs found at the UN and the 1993 bombing of New York's World Trade Center and a foiled plot to bomb other New York landmarks, which was, of course, in April of 1993 that was foiled. One of 4 Islamic fundamentalists convicted in the Trade Center bombing is imprisoned at Leavenworth, along with the man convicted in the plot to blow up the United Nations and other places in New York. London Police Superintendent Derek Kelleher said that 3 more suspect devices were found in El-Hayat's offices after Monday's explosion, and all 3 were detonated in controlled explosions. One of the 2 men injured in the blast was hospitalized with facial and abdominal injuries, while the second was in shock, understandably so, Kelleher said. The 8 bombs mailed to U.S. addresses all bore, as we covered earlier, Alexandria, Egypt postmarks. Al-Hayat security employees said they believe the latest letter bombs were also postmarked in Alexandria, but their report cannot be confirmed. The editor of Al-Hayat told CNN that he suspected Islamic fundamentalists were behind all the letter bomb attempts. Journalists working for the paper said they were disturbed and worried by the attacks, end quote. So you guys always, after these jobs, whatever these jobs may be, and this is for you, Paul and Rich, and I'll start with you, Rich, and then Paul, you can contribute to the answer as well. You guys always have a nice debriefing, and what that does is it helps for future jobs because each job is a lesson. So for you, you never perfect your craft as a bomb tech, but you certainly have more experience than other bomb techs. So, Rich, I'll start with you. How did this help you further improve your craft as a bomb tech? And for new guys that were coming into the squad around this time, what did you use from this job to teach them?
Well, this was our first letter bombs. You know, letter bombs are a little unique compared to other bombs. You know, they're all pretty much the same, but letter bombs are a little bit different, and especially trying to disrupt it and trying to get parts out of this thing where it's not going to work and it's not going to go off on you. So you pick up you pick up more knowledge of this thing. So if somebody has a letter bomb, you can just tell them over the phone. You know, you can do this, this, and this. But you really want to take a look at it. But You just learn more. It's just another learning tool, another learning experience. But before we go on, we're giving ourselves a lot of credit for this and that and everything. I just want to mention the guys down in Alabama. These guys taught us, and they were great. They were really, really, really good instructors, and I thank them for my life because they taught us so well. So my hat's off to them.
Paul?
Same here. Yeah, they believe the Army EOD. They knew their craft, and what they had, their knowledge, they shared with us without pulling any punches. It wasn't like, I'm not going to tell them the whole story. I'll just tell them part of the story and how to do this. They made sure that we did it, and we did it on our own. And it was a pass or fail. It's not like, well, you're going to get a second chance. You could stay an extra couple of weeks, and you do some remedial help. If you made the grade and passed, then you went back to the bomb squad, and that's when you started to work on packages, on devices. If you didn't cut the mustard and you didn't pass, then you go back, pick a precinct, and that's it. You don't get a second chance.
Yeah. There's a certain amount of respect with all this because the guys that taught us, they could tell stories then, and now we can tell stories now. And some of those guys were hurt. Some of them were blown up. Some of them were flown in the air. And you respected them because they studied their craft and they still went back and still did it again. So, my hat's off to these guys. My expression is what would Alabama do? Alabama is down in Huntsville, Alabama. It's called Redstone Arsenal, and that's where we're trained. We're trained by the Army and by other bomb techs that went there to work as instructors. But they were all excellent, the best of the best. Taught us. So that's why we were so good.
With relation to the package, Richie had mentioned earlier that Semtex is a little bit more sensitive than say C4. C4 you could toss it around throw it at a brick wall, nothing's going to happen. It burns. You could burn it. Some people in the military, I believe, they used to cook with it. C4, yeah. Semtex, you figured if it went through the mail through the normal channels, that package must have been bounced around, squished, crushed from one location to another, and then it found its address at the UN, and that it didn't function any place else except that if it was electrically charged and you opened it as designed, then you would have a detonation. But it worked out that it stayed intact, and how sometimes in the mail packages, some of them get mutilated, they get destroyed. This one came through with in its entirety, and we were able to have a good shot with it and take it down and have it rendered safe.
We'll hit on a few more things because I know you guys are busy, and I appreciate you guys being here and giving me some of your time. It's been a lot of fun having you guys back on the show. That being said, afterwards, there's a few days that go by, and Don, you were there as the liaison, as you discussed with me off the air, and as you discussed tonight on the air. When at some point the chief of detectives, who was Pat Kelleher at the time, understandably just wants a briefing so he knows what's going on and he could tell Howard Safer, who's the police commissioner at the time. So Bill Ryan from Arson Explosion comes down from 1PP, gets you, brings you back. If it's confidential, obviously don't say it, but what's not confidential, please discuss if you can. What did you tell essentially Pat Kelleher when you briefed him?
Being scooped up from the scene, and I was again the intelligence coordinator, liaison, making sure nobody's bothering these guys and making nice with the UN bosses and everything, keeping everything smooth, keeping everything quiet. Bill Ryan picks me up and says, I have orders to pick you up and take you forthwith to 1PP to brief the chief of detectives. I said, okay. And he was kind enough to instruct me, I might be walking in to the lion's den. So be careful how you conduct yourself. Be careful what you say. And I appreciated that. So I go up there, and there's all these other bosses from the detective bureau there too. And I think some people from the intelligence division. And basically the chief said to me, detective, what is my bomb squad detectives been up to for the last couple of days? Nobody's briefed us. So I said, Chief, they've been working nonstop. around the clock. This is I just gave them briefly what they found, what they analyzed, what they did. The bottom line is nobody got hurt. They recovered the evidence, and they're doing follow-up stuff. And I'm still trying to collect any information that I can additionally. But really, the best source of information was not the feds, was not the State Department, was not the UN. The best source of information was Paul and Richie, because of the fact that they successfully rendered safe those devices, and the evidence was in pristine condition. And the chief and the bosses seem to be pleased with that. I'm known for speaking a lot at length, but I kept it short. I thank Billy Ryan, if you're out there. I still remember that night. Thank you for keeping me from.
Here he is.
Hey, Billy.
Hey, Bill. Bill, thank you for that brief before I got to headquarters with you that night. And I briefed the chief, and I kept it short, and he didn't have any other questions, and more or less tell the guys good job and carry on.
So that brings me to, I guess, one of the final things a couple of things that we'll hit on before we get out of here is, Richie, I know the first time that you were on the show, you mentioned that you were glad that this didn't get a lot of attention because you don't want copycats, which is understandable, of course. But again, I go back to this cultural significance of this building and the significance of New York City as a whole. Did it surprise the three of you that this didn't get more press attention?
Not that I'm complaining, but I was very surprised. I never even saw it in the newspaper, so I never saw it. But that's okay by me because I don't like copycats. But it is surprising that the papers didn't pick up on this. It should have been headlines.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of articles here from CNN, AP, and the New York Times, but really outside of that week or that weekend, because it beyond that just stopped.
Mike,
it didn't get any coverage.
Chime in.
Go ahead.
Again, I worked at the UN for 3.5 years before I came in on the job.
Right.
There was back in the late 70s a live device with dynamite in it and a timer that was rendered safe by the library building of the UN. That never made the paper, I believe. And then there was a guy who committed suicide in the North Garden. The UN was notorious for covering things up. They didn't want any bad press. They didn't want anything negative. So, giving you my knowledge and background and experience from UN security, it doesn't surprise me that was hushed up. Anything that was negative, they didn't want out there with the press.
We might have an indication, going back to what we mentioned earlier, as to why these bombs might have been sent. It might not just be that article. I can tell you this. I go back to the article written January 15th, 1997, titled Al-Hayat, a Journalistic Noah's Ark. Quote, the newspaper shocked many in the Arab world when it established a bureau in Jerusalem and started publishing interviews with people like Shimon Peres. The articles began appearing under a Jerusalem dateline at a time when most Arabs in public life still referred to Israel as the quote-unquote Zionist entity, which might be another reason, but that's another topic for another show. It's been 25 years, and then we could wrap up with this. And I'll start with you, Paul, and then Rich and Don. 25 years since this job. Obviously, later that year, you guys had another interesting job, which I'll bring you back for in the summer in Brooklyn. And then, of course, next year was the embassy bombing in Kenya and Tanzania. 2000 was the USS Cole. In 2001, we get 9/11. When you look back, especially given the fact that this was another thing in the road to 9/11, what are your reflections on this case all these years later? Paul, I'll start with you.
Reflections. Well, as Donald said, it was a successful job. No one got hurt. We were able to recover, like Richie said, we recovered good evidence and able to be used in prosecuting if that was possible. And it's just one of those days that we had these jobs one after another. It's like after the fourth one, kind of like we were pretty close to the end of the tour at that time, and we were glad that, I was anyway, that we were going to get cut loose to go home, and then another team was going to step in for the day tour. So, just having this successful job was good enough for me. It was a positive learning experience, that's for sure.
Rich,
And,
go ahead. Sorry, I thought.
no, it's all right. No, go ahead. I'm good.
You're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it was a great job. Everybody lived through it. We were able to. We weren't able to catch anybody who did this, and but I don't think they really had enough to go on as far as somebody in a basement in some in some place in Alexandria, Egypt, making these things. So I don't know. There was very little intel. They sort of just popped up on us, so there was very little intel before or after about these things. But it was a good job, so I was happy with it. And back then there was a lot of terrorism going on, a lot of attacks, small, little, bigger, whatever. But they were coming one after the other. Today you don't see that, or I don't see it as much as back then. But hang on to your hat because it's coming again. The southern border's open. That's all I have to say about that one.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Good luck to the new guys.
Yeah, I just hope, and I've said this before, we had a lot of people that were warning about the propensity for a big event in the mid 90s after 93. John O'Neill from the FBI was one of them. Danny Richards, who you guys worked with in the bomb squad, was one of them. Both those guys ran to the Trade Center to help people on 9/11. Both of them got killed. So I just hope that there's not similar figures running around now, like Danny Richards and like John O'Neill, that are saying, guys, something's coming. We got to be ready for it, that are going to become casualties in the next big one. Rich, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just remember before the World Trade Center, before the bombing of it, not the aircraft, but we were getting intel. We were getting these echoes coming in about 3 months before that. It's going to be a building that's going to be attacked, and they had these special squads that went out, and all you had to do was drive around the building. You didn't see it on fire or blown up. It was okay. You just kept driving. And that was their way of trying to deter anything. But 3 months before the attack, we heard it was coming. So it wasn't a surprise when it happened. Only thing is, we thought that was the biggest job we were ever going to handle. We were wrong. So,
Don?
I remember distinctly at that time, you had Slobodan Milosevic, give or take dates, killing Muslims, men, women, children, old people in Central and Eastern Europe.
yes,
They called it ethnic cleansing. It's basically what Hitler did to the Jews, but he was doing it to the Muslims. I was the intelligence coordinator, and I was in close contact with people at the UN, and actually went with Richie Halford down to the UN and spoke with some people. And I had a chance to look at the latest copies of some lead magazines that are in Europe. One of them that I would read is the Spiegel. And I got a UN interpreter to sit down with me and translate the articles. And I was writing as fast as I could. And essentially, it was the leaders of these Arab organizations saying, and again, the aftermath of the conflict of the Soviet Union with the United States in Afghanistan, and then they pulled out, we pulled out, and it left a huge power vacuum. Okay, but they were saying in this lead magazine, straight out, that they appealed, the Arab community appealed to the United Nations and the Secretary General, and they weren't doing anything to intervene to try to save the lives of these Muslims being murdered. And the end of it was basically the Secretary General, his family and staff should not feel comfortable being in New York because you could be targeted by us. Words to that effect. I was horrified reading it. I went back and I spoke to the guys in the squad. I was CO. I told the intelligence division. I was like John the Baptist. I was out in the wilderness talking about this, but most people didn't care or listen. And meaning we thought it was going to be the UN. And if you recall, that's when I went to Lieutenant Boza and asked if me and Richie could do an R&D program about trying to render safe vans and large vehicles that might be driven into an underground garage with a large vehicle bomb to take down a building. I was betting the rent money that it was going to be the UN Secretariat building. If you took out the vertical supports in the garage for that, that building could fall across the East River and you could walk to Long Island City and not get your feet wet. This is what I thought. This is what I talked about as much as I could to anybody who would listen. And obviously it was not the UN. It eventually, it was the World Trade Center in 1993.
I just want to say that was you and Richie Hackford, not you and Richie Teemsma doing that. I got to give credit to Hackford. Hackford.
Yeah.
Well, this was an interesting job, and the reason why I wanted to uncover it, and I have to thank quite a few people off the air that gave me some briefings. I won't mention the names because I don't know if they want their names out there, but you guys know who they are. Thank you guys, because, originally when I was kicking around this idea in November, when I think I interviewed you first, Rich, and then you, Paul, I was like, you know what? This didn't get a lot of press. I ought to do a deep dive on it. Maybe I can learn something. And I think we learned a lot tonight about what this job meant at the time, what it means now, and the great job that you guys did throughout the day into the early hours of January 14th. And of course, the intelligence gathered from it and the evidence gathered from it. I do like to say, before I throw it back to you guys for some final shout outs, this episode is going to be dedicated to the memory of Charlie Hill. Like I said, he's not with us anymore. He did a great job with this. And if Charlie, to his family, if you guys ever watch this, we're thinking of him. He's very much missed. I heard a little bit about him. He sounded like an amazing guy. So this episode goes out to him and to you guys. And Charlie is not forgotten. So thank you very much to him and Jeff Oberdier, who was there, Kevin Barry, Mike Murray, Rick Vergara. Great job, guys. You guys did excellent work. And of course, Paul, Rich, and Don, thanks again for coming on the show. Any shout outs any of you want to give?
No, I'm good.
Rich, you good?
I'm good. Trying to hold everybody.
Any shout outs, Don?
I was at the bomb squad recently. Guys, I got to tell you, the squad's in good hands. They got the latest, best equipment and response vehicles and robots and X-ray equipment. The squad's in good hands, fellas. I was there recently.
I understand they're going to build a whole new building up in Rogerson's Neck.
I understand that was in the works, but with this defund the police thing and the new administration, I think it's all on hold.
We're not the police. We're the bomb squad.
No, this is true, my friend. This is true.
There you go. Well, gentlemen, this wraps up a great show. Don't sign off yet. We're going to do a debrief off the air, so stick around. Coming up on next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, he was an NYPD lieutenant. He's currently a frequent pundit on television. Smart guy, funny guy. Bodyguard to the stars, too. He recently worked as a bodyguard for Wendy Williams, a popular talk show host. His name's Darren Porcher, and he'll be here January 17th. On the Mike the New Haven podcast. January 18th, this show is going to be a show, my friends. Ralph Friedman, one of the most decorated detectives in the history of the NYPD, Bob Starkman, a returning guest, and the real Donnie Brasco, Joe Pistone, are all going to be on this show Tuesday, January 18th, for a panel called Behind the Badges. Look back at all of their very, very interesting careers. In the meantime, on behalf of retired NYPD bomb squad detectives Rich Teemsma, Paul Yurkiw, and Don Sadowy, this has been another volume 18 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson explosion and bomb squad. I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.